never thought I'd be the type to go camping, but when Leo, my best friend from college, invited me and Nina on a weekend trip to the Smoky Mountains, I figured I'd give it a shot. Nina was coming after all, and I wasn't about to turn down a chance to spend time with her. Besides, Leo was the camping expert. He made it sound easy, even fun. When he pulled up in his Jeep, packed to the brim with gear, I started to second-guess my decision. "We're not going to some crowded campground," he said, grinning as he revved the engine. "We're finding our own spot, real camping." The drive up was beautiful at first. Winding roads, towering trees, the golden light of the setting sun. But as we ventured deeper, the vibe changed. The roads got narrower and the trees seemed to press in on us. I kept brushing off the uneasy feeling. It was just the wilderness, right? Leo finally found the perfect spot, a secluded clearing by a small stream. It felt untouched, like no one had been there in years. While Leo and Nina set up camp, I wandered around, taking it all in. The air was cool, the forest alive with the sound of insects and rustling leaves. But there was something off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard it, a faint whistle, almost like a tune, coming from deep in the woods. I froze, straining to hear more. But it stopped as suddenly as it started. "It's probably the wind," Leo said when I mentioned it, though his tone wasn't as confident as usual. We sat around the fire that night, roasting marshmallows and listening to Leo's campfire stories. He told us about hikers who'd gone missing in the area, their bodies never found. Nina laughed it off, but I could see the unease in her eyes. Honestly, I was terrified, but I wasn't about to admit it. As the fire died down, I felt the urge to stretch my legs. "I'm just going to grab more firewood," I said, trying to sound casual. Leo nodded and Nina offered to come with me, but I insisted I'd be quick. The woods felt different at night. Every sound was amplified. The crunch of my boots, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves. Then I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then it moved again, deliberate and slow. "Leo," I called out, my voice shaky. "Nina!" They came running, Leo holding a flashlight, Nina clutching a heavy branch like a weapon. I pointed to where I'd seen the shadow, but it was gone. "Probably an animal," Leo said, though his eyes lingered on the spot a little too long. We went back to the fire, but the mood had shifted. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind felt sinister. Nina kept glancing over her shoulder, and even Leo seemed quieter than usual. Then we heard it again, that whistle, but this time it was closer, more distinct. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't random. It was a tune, a haunting melody that sent shivers through my entire body. "We're not alone," Nina whispered. By morning, none of us had slept much. Leo tried to lighten the mood as we made breakfast, but even he couldn't ignore the tension hanging over us. While Nina was rinsing dishes by the stream, she found something, a piece of torn fabric caught on a branch. It was dirty and weathered, but unmistakably part of a shirt. "This doesn't feel right," she said, her voice trembling. Leo brushed it off, saying it was probably left by a hiker. But I saw the way he avoided looking at it too long. Nina wanted to pack up and leave, but Leo convinced us to stay, promising we'd leave by sundown. As the day wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. At one point, I caught a glimpse of something, a figure darting between the trees. It was too quick to make out, but it was enough to send my heart racing. By the time the sun set, we were on edge. That's when the whistling started again, louder this time. It echoed through the clearing, coming from all directions. Nina clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave," she said. "Now." We started packing up as quickly as we could, shoving gear into the Jeep with shaking hands. The whistling grew closer, joined by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and far too close. Leo grabbed his hatchet, standing guard as Nina and I finished loading the last of the gear. Just as we were about to jump in the Jeep, a figure stepped into the clearing. It was tall, unnaturally so, and dressed in ragged clothes that hung off its skeletal frame. Its face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but its eyes, glowing faintly in the firelight, were fixed on us. It didn't move, just stood there watching. "Get in the car," Leo hissed. We didn't need to be told twice. The Jeep roared to life, and Leo floored it, tearing out of the clearing and onto the dirt road. But the figure didn't stay behind. It followed us, moving impossibly fast, its ragged form illuminated in the rearview mirror. We finally reached the main road, but the figure was still behind us, its glowing eyes never breaking contact. Then, just as we thought we were safe, another figure appeared in the middle of the road. This one was smaller, hunched, and holding what looked like a lantern. Leo swerved, narrowly missing it, but as we sped past, I saw its face, hollow, with skin stretched tight over sharp bones. It grinned at me, a wide, unnatural smile that I'll never forget. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town. The Jeep skidded into the parking lot of a gas station, and we all stumbled out, gasping for air. The police didn't believe us at first, but when they checked the area, they found something chilling. A cluster of makeshift graves marked with crude wooden crosses. Nearby, they discovered remnants of clothing and personal items, including a whistle identical to the one we'd heard. The sheriff told us the graves dated back decades, possibly to a group of settlers who vanished in the area. Their spirits were said to haunt the forest, luring unsuspecting campers to their doom. To this day, I can't hear a whistle without freezing in fear. If you're thinking about camping in the Smoky Mountains, take my advice. Don't. Some things are better left undisturbed. It was the summer of 2015, and my best friend Raphael and I were itching to escape the city. Everything felt loud, crowded, and way too chaotic. So when Raphael suggested we go camping in Delwyn Woods, it felt like the perfect plan. It wasn't some famous park or anything, just a small, quiet patch of trees a couple of hours away. Honestly, that's what made it perfect. Originally, it was supposed to be a group trip. We invited a bunch of friends, but as the date got closer, the excuses started piling up. Family emergency, too broke, not really into camping. You get the idea. By the time the trip rolled around, it was just me and Raphael. At first, I considered canceling, but Raphael wouldn't hear it. "We don't need a crowd to have fun," he said, and he was right. So, on a bright Saturday morning, we packed our gear, hopped on a bus, and set off. The ride was long, but when we finally got off and stepped into the forest, it felt like stepping into another world. The trees were massive, the air smelled clean, and there was this peaceful quiet that I hadn't felt in months. We hiked for about an hour before we found a spot near a creek, shady, quiet, and perfect for setting up camp. As the sun dipped lower, we built a small fire and started cooking dinner. Everything felt calm, but there was this weird undercurrent, like something wasn't quite right. I couldn't put my finger on it, so I just shook it off. Big mistake. We were halfway through eating when we heard voices. At first, I thought maybe another group of campers had set up nearby, but when the voices got closer, my stomach sank. 3 guys stepped out of the trees, dressed in jeans and hoodies, carrying flashlights. They seemed friendly enough. Too friendly, actually. They smiled a lot and asked way too many questions. "Where are you guys from? How long are you staying? Just the 2 of you out here?" Their tone was casual, but their eyes didn't match their smiles. I could feel Raphael tense up beside me. Something about them felt wrong, like they were sizing us up. When they finally left, it was like a weight lifted off my chest. But Raphael didn't waste any time. "We're moving," he said. "Now." I wanted to argue. I mean, moving camp after dark? But I couldn't shake the bad feeling. So we packed up, doused the fire, and left. We didn't go far, just enough to find a spot surrounded by trees, with a slight hill that gave us a view of the area below. It wasn't perfect, but it felt safer. By the time we set up again, it was pitch dark. We lit another small fire and ate some instant noodles in silence. Neither of us brought up the strangers, but I could tell we were both thinking about them. After dinner, Raphael tried to lighten the mood. We talked, laughed, and even told a few dumb jokes, but the tension didn't really go away. I kept catching myself looking over my shoulder, listening for anything out of place. Eventually, the exhaustion caught up to us. We put out the fire and crawled into our sleeping bags. I didn't even remember falling asleep. I woke up to a sound, low, steady, and growing louder. It took me a second to realize it was an engine. My heart immediately started pounding. What kind of idiot drives into the middle of a forest at night, and why? I unzipped my tent and crept out, careful not to make any noise. The engine was closer now, and then I saw it. Beams of light cutting through the trees, flashlights bobbing around like searchlights. I scrambled over to Raphael's tent, shaking him awake. "Get up, now." "What's going on?" he mumbled. "There are people at our old campsite," I said, "and they're not camping." His eyes widened, and we both crawled toward the edge of the hill. From there, we had a clear view of the old site. The same 3 guys were back, and they weren't just looking around. They were armed. One had a crowbar, another had a bat, and the third was holding what looked like a rope. My stomach twisted. "What do we do?" Raphael whispered. I didn't have an answer. We stayed as still as we could, watching them from the shadows. The guys were angry, shouting and smashing things. One of them picked up my jacket, the one I'd forgotten, and waved it around like he'd just won a prize. "They know we're out here," Raphael whispered. "We can't stay." He was right. If they decided to search the area, it wouldn't take long to find us. We packed quickly, taking only the essentials. We left the tents behind to avoid making noise and started moving deeper into the forest. Every step felt like a gamble. Twigs snapped under our feet, branches scratched against our jackets, and the darkness swallowed everything else. My flashlight stayed off. I wasn't about to give away our position. But then we heard it. Voices. They were closer now, too close. We ducked into some bushes and held our breath. Flashlight beams danced around, coming dangerously close. "I know they're out here," one of them growled. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. Raphael squeezed my arm, his grip trembling. We stayed completely still as the lights passed over us. Finally, the voices moved on and we started creeping away. But then I heard something. A low, guttural sound like a growl. I froze. Raphael froze. Slowly, I turned my head and saw it. A shadow moving through the trees. It wasn't human. We ran. I didn't care about noise anymore. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't friendly, and I wasn't sticking around to find out. We could hear the guys shouting behind us now, and I realized they'd seen it too. We didn't stop running until we hit a dirt road. I was gasping for air, my legs burning, but at least we were out of the woods. Literally. Raphael and I looked at each other, wide-eyed and shaken. "What the hell was that?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, "and I don't want to." Before we could figure out our next move, we heard the rumble of an engine again. Headlights appeared in the distance, and my heart sank. For a second, I thought it was them. But as the truck got closer, I saw an older man behind the wheel. I stepped into the road and waved him down. He stopped, rolling down the window with a skeptical look. "You boys lost?" "We need help," I said, my voice shaking. The man let us climb into the back, and as the truck rumbled away, I looked back at the forest. The shadows seemed to move, and for a second I thought I saw it again. That shape, whatever it was. We made it home, but I haven't been camping since. Maybe it was the guys, maybe it was whatever was stalking the woods, or maybe it was both. Either way, I'm done with forests. That's my story. If you liked it, or if you got your own creepy camping tale, drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay safe out there. You know how you get those wild ideas that seem great at the moment but turn out to be completely insane later? Yeah, that was me. I decided it'd be a romantic idea to take Mariana, my girlfriend, on a camping trip. She's not exactly the outdoorsy type, but I convinced her it would be a fun way to celebrate our anniversary. There was this clearing I remembered from my college days, a hidden spot deep in the woods. It wasn't on any map or part of an official campground, just a place my friends and I stumbled upon back in the day. I hadn't been there in years, but I figured it'd be perfect. Quiet, private, and far away from the city noise. Mariana was hesitant, of course. She asked all the typical questions. What about wild animals? What if there's no cell service? But I reassured her with all the confidence of someone who had no idea what they were doing. Trust me, babe, I said. It'll be fun. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. We packed my old camping gear, most of it probably hadn't been touched in years, and hit the road early Saturday morning. The drive was nice enough, and the weather couldn't have been better. But as soon as we pulled off the main road and onto the dirt trail leading to the clearing, Mariana's anxiety started kicking in. Are you sure this is safe? She asked. Relax, I said, grinning. We'll be fine. When we finally got to the clearing, it was just like I remembered. Open, surrounded by tall trees, with a perfect view of the stars once the sun went down. But something felt off. The first thing we noticed was a fire pit that wasn't ours. Someone had clearly been here recently. There were bits of trash scattered around, an empty soda can, a crumpled snack wrapper, and an old, tattered backpack leaning against a log. Mariana gave me a look. This is supposed to be private, right? Probably just some kids hanging out, I said, trying to brush it off. They're long gone. We set up our tent near the edge of the clearing where the ground was flat and soft. While Mariana organized our sleeping bags, I got a fire going. Before long, we were sitting around it, laughing, drinking, and swapping stories. For a moment, everything felt perfect, and I started to think this might have been a good idea after all. But as the night went on, the clearing seemed to grow quieter, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Even the crickets had stopped chirping. Mariana noticed it too. She asked if I heard something, but I laughed it off. Just the wind, I said, though even I didn't believe that. We stayed up late talking about nothing and everything. By the time we decided to call it a night, it was past midnight. I doused the fire and zipped us into the tent. See, I said, grinning at Mariana. Totally safe. If only I knew how wrong I was. I don't know what time it was when it started, but we were both lying in the tent trying to fall asleep. The forest was silent. Too silent. Then came the first sound. It was faint at first, just a soft rustling in the distance. I told myself it was probably just an animal, but then it grew louder, like something, or someone, was moving closer. Mariana tensed up next to me. Did you hear that? She whispered. Probably just a deer, I said, though my voice was shaking. We stayed completely still, listening. The sound stopped, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But then came something else, a metallic clanging like a piece of scrap metal being hit or dragged. What the hell is that? Mariana's voice was barely audible. I didn't answer because I didn't know. The sound got louder, and this time, it was followed by something that made my blood run cold. A laugh. Not a normal laugh, but this high-pitched, distorted cackle that seemed to echo through the trees. Mariana grabbed my arm. We need to leave. Let's wait, I whispered, my mind racing. I didn't want to run blindly into the woods at night. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it started, replaced by heavy, deliberate footsteps. They were close now, too close. Inside the tent, the air felt suffocating. I grabbed the small hunting knife I'd brought with me, more as a joke than anything, and held it tightly. Mariana was clutching my arm, and I could feel her shaking. The footsteps circled around the tent. Whoever, or whatever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were taking their time, like they wanted us to know they were there. Then came the shadows. The moon was bright enough that we could see them on the fabric of the tent. 3 figures, their outlines sharp and menacing. They stood there motionless for what felt like hours. Mariana's breathing was quick and shallow. What do we do? She mouthed. I couldn't answer. My mind was blank. The knife in my hand suddenly felt like a toy. If they wanted to come in, there was nothing I could do to stop them. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the shadows moved. The footsteps grew fainter until they disappeared completely. For a moment, neither of us moved. I listened as hard as I could, hoping, praying that they were gone for good. "This is our chance," I whispered. "We're getting out of here." Mariana nodded and we both got ready to bolt. I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible, gripping the knife in one hand while holding hers in the other. "Run," I whispered, and we did. The second we stepped out of the tent, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I tightened my grip on Mariana's hand and started running, knife still in my other hand. The clearing felt massive, every shadow stretching out like it was trying to grab us. Behind us, the footsteps started again, fast, heavy, and getting closer. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Mariana was crying, but she kept running, holding on to me like her life depended on it. We broke through the edge of the clearing and into the woods. The trees were thick here, branches whipping against our faces as we stumbled forward. I didn't dare look back. Then came the laughter again, but this time it was louder, closer. It echoed through the trees, bouncing around like it was coming from all directions. "Keep going," I shouted, my voice cracking. Somehow we made it to the car. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before finally hitting the unlock button. The headlights flashed, and that's when I saw them. 3 figures standing at the edge of the woods just beyond the clearing. They weren't running anymore. They were just standing there, watching. Mariana screamed, yanking open the car door and jumping in. I followed, slamming my door shut and jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I hit the gas, spraying dirt and gravel as we sped down the trail. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away, pulling into the parking lot of a small roadside motel. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. Mariana was shaking, her face buried in her hands. "We're okay," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. After checking into a room, we sat on the edge of the bed in silence. That's when Mariana asked the question I'd been dreading. "What were those people?" "I don't know," I admitted. But the truth is, I had no idea what we had just experienced. Was it some kind of sick joke? Locals messing with campers for fun? Or was it something darker, something we couldn't explain? The next morning, I convinced Mariana to go back to the clearing with me. I needed to see it in daylight, to prove to myself that it was real. When we got there, everything was gone, our tent, our gear, even the trash we'd seen the night before. The fire pit was cold, and the ground where our tent had been was undisturbed, like no one had ever been there. But there was something new. Carved into the trunk of a tree at the edge of the clearing was a symbol, a strange, twisted shape that neither of us recognized. It wasn't there the day before, and I knew it wasn't left by accident. We didn't stay long. We got in the car and drove home, and we haven't been camping since. Every now and then I'll think back to that night, to the laughter and the shadows and that feeling of being hunted. And I'll wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't run? This story has everything that keeps me up at night. Unanswered questions, creeping dread, and the realization that sometimes you're just not meant to find out the truth. If you've got similar stories, drop them in the comments. Let's freak each other out together. Hey everyone. If you've ever considered wild camping, let me just say, think twice. A couple of years ago, my friends Alex, Emma, and I decided to take on this epic adventure in Scotland. You know, just us, the wilderness, and some tarps. Yeah, no tents, because we wanted to keep it authentic. Let me tell you, it was authentic, all right. Authentically terrifying. We hopped on an overnight bus from Glasgow, thinking it'd be a cool way to kick things off. But the reality? A cramped ride, 0 sleep, and us stumbling off the bus at 5 a.m. like zombies. The countryside was eerily beautiful. Mist clung to the hills, and the silence was so thick it felt like the world was holding its breath. Perfect setting for an adventure or a disaster. We were so sleep-deprived that even reading the map became a challenge. Emma, bless her heart, took charge, and confidently led us straight onto the wrong trail. None of us caught it right away, though. We were too busy soaking in the golden sunrise and trying to shake off the bus ride. But after half an hour of hiking, we realized our mistake. And instead of turning back like sane people, we decided to wing it. Spoiler alert, that was a horrible idea. About an hour in, we stumbled upon this creepy old war memorial at a crossroads. It was covered in moss, and there was something about it that felt off. I remembered reading somewhere that people used to bury suicides at crossroads. Yeah, comforting thought, right? But it was the perfect spot for a break, so we dumped our backpacks and sat down. The sun had fully risen by then, casting this warm, golden glow over everything. It almost made us forget how lost we were. We pulled out some snacks and tried to laugh it off, but as much as we joked around, there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, like we were being watched. Little did we know, the real nightmare was just beginning. After our break, we set off again, determined to find our way back on track. That's when we came across this massive field. At first glance, it looked like an easy shortcut. We could see a gate on the far side and thought, why not save some time? The field, however, wasn't empty. It was full of cows, and not the cute, docile kind. These were big, heavy beasts, just grazing and minding their business. At first, we hesitated for a second, but Alex shrugged. They're just cows. We'll be fine. Famous last words. As we got deeper into the field, I noticed the cows weren't grazing anymore. They were watching us. Their big, dark eyes locked onto us like we were intruding on their turf. They're probably just curious, Emma whispered, trying to sound calm. But then, one of them started walking toward us. Then another, and another. Before we knew it, the whole herd was moving, their steps picking up speed. Guys? I said, my voice shaking. They're coming closer, and then it happened. One cow started galloping and the rest followed. It was like a stampede out of a nightmare. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it had burst out of my chest. Alex yelled, "Run!" But running with heavy backpacks? Yeah, no. We were barely moving. I turned to see the cows closing in, their massive bodies shaking the ground. My brain was screaming, this is it. We're gonna die, trampled by cows. Emma, somehow thinking clearly, shouted, "Stop, don't run, make yourself big." It sounded insane, but we were desperate. We stopped, turned around, and threw our arms in the air, yelling like maniacs. And it worked, kind of. The cows hesitated, some slowing down, but the tension was unbearable. That's when we heard a voice yelling from the edge of the field. A farmer, waving his arms frantically, shouting, "Move toward the gate, slowly!" We didn't need to be told twice. Keeping our arms up, we shuffled toward the gate, every step feeling like a lifetime. The cows circled us, snorting and stomping, their massive heads just feet away. When we finally reached the gate, I climbed over so fast I almost fell on the other side. Alex and Emma weren't far behind. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, our legs shaking like jelly. The farmer walked up, shaking his head. "City kids, huh?" he said, smirking. "Next time, stick to the edges of the field. Cows don't like strangers in their space, especially when there are calves around." Looking back, it's easy to laugh about it. I mean, 3 clueless campers almost taken out by cows. Sounds ridiculous, right? But in the moment, it was pure terror. When we got home, I did some digging and found out cows kill more people each year than sharks. Yeah, you heard me. Cows. Apparently, it's not uncommon for hikers to get trampled when they wander into a field without thinking. So, moral of the story? Respect the cows. Stick to the edges and maybe, just maybe, think twice before taking a shortcut through a field full of giant animals. When I was about 14, my parents thought it'd be a great idea to ship me off to this summer camp called Camp Golden Lake. It was one of those back-to-nature camps for teens, 6 old wooden cabins spread out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a forest that looked straight out of a horror movie. There was a lake, a big fire pit, and even a beat-up volleyball net. Perfect for anyone who loves mosquitoes and questionable food. When we pulled up, the place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Paint peeling off the cabin's creaky steps. It felt like it could collapse at any moment. But the counselors all seemed nice enough. Most of them were young, like in their late teens or early 20s. There was only one older guy, Greg, who was probably pushing 50. He gave off cool uncle vibes and told us a bunch of campfire rules that no one was going to follow. After unpacking, I claimed the top bunk in one of the cabins. My cabin mates seemed all right. One kid, Jason, was obsessed with telling ghost stories, which we laughed off at first. Another kid, Ethan, was kind of a know-it-all, but had a decent sense of humor. Later that day, after setting up, we decided to check out the forest nearby before dinner. "Don't wander too far," one of the counselors said with a grin, as if we'd listen. We stayed within sight of the cabins at first, but as we went deeper, Jason stopped. "Do you see that?" he whispered. There, about 20 feet away, was a man. His clothes were filthy, and his gray beard looked like it hadn't seen a comb in years. He just stood there, watching us. "Probably a counselor," I said, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, right," Jason muttered. The man gave this weird smile, like too wide, and then turned and walked deeper into the forest. We all ran back to the cabin, hearts pounding. That night we told one of the counselors about it, but they just shrugged. The forest is public property. Probably a hiker. That should have made us feel better. It didn't. The first couple of nights were okay, I guess. We stuck to the rules, staying close to the cabins, keeping the lights out by 11 p.m., but something felt off. On the second night, Jason woke us up. "Listen," he whispered. I rubbed my eyes, annoyed, but then I heard it too. A rustling noise just outside the cabin. It stopped for a moment, then started again. "Probably an animal," Ethan said, trying to sound confident, but none of us moved. The next morning we found footprints outside, barefoot, not boots. They weren't huge, but they were definitely human. One of the counselors, a girl named Abby, brushed it off. "There's always someone messing around in the woods, just lock your doors at night." But things got worse. That afternoon, while exploring deeper into the forest, we found this old shack. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, but inside, it told a different story. There were scraps of paper with scribbles, drawings of cabins, kids at the lake, even the fire pit. One of the drawings looked like Jason. "What the hell?" he muttered, backing away. Ethan grabbed a notebook from the floor. It was full of writing, but the handwriting was messy and scattered, like someone had written it while panicking. "They're watching," it said on one page. Another read, "They don't know I'm here." We booked it back to camp, shaking. That night, the rustling outside the cabin came back. Louder this time. We didn't sleep much. The third day felt like it stretched forever. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were all jumpy. Every shadow in the trees, every creak in the cabin made my stomach tighten. Around noon, some of us decided to stick close to camp instead of wandering off. Jason, though, couldn't resist a challenge. "Come on," he said, "just a quick look around. We'll stay close this time." Reluctantly, a few of us followed him toward the edge of the woods. We weren't even 10 minutes in when Ethan froze. "Guys, over there," he whispered, pointing. Standing in the shadows was the same man we'd seen the first day. This time, he wasn't just watching. He took a step forward, then another. "Who are you?" Jason shouted, his voice cracking slightly. The man didn't answer. He just tilted his head, like he was studying us. His clothes were even dirtier now, and his beard looked tangled with bits of leaves. He gave that same unsettling grin as before, then disappeared into the trees. We bolted back to camp, breathless. When we told Abby and Greg, they exchanged worried glances. "That's it. No more going near the woods," Greg said firmly. "Stick to the cabins or the main area. Got it?" That night, none of us could relax. Jason tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell he was rattled. We all were. I woke up to the sound of the cabin door rattling. At first, I thought it was one of the counselors doing their usual late-night rounds to make sure we'd locked up. but something about the way the handle was jerking didn't feel right. "Guys," I whispered, shaking Jason awake. "Someone's at the door." He groaned, half asleep, until we both heard it again. A metallic click, like someone trying to pick the lock. Ethan sat up. "What the hell is that?" Before I could answer, a beam of light cut across the window. Someone was outside with a flashlight, moving slowly around the cabin. "Stay down!" I hissed, waving for everyone to duck. We crouched near our beds as the light swept across the room, pausing at each window. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever it was would hear it. The person outside circled the cabin a few times, their footsteps crunching in the gravel. At one point, the beam of light stopped directly on me, and I held my breath, hoping they hadn't seen me through the gap in the curtains. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps faded, and the light disappeared. But none of us moved. "Do you think they're gone?" Jason whispered. "I don't know," I replied. "Let's just stay quiet." We stayed awake until morning, jumpy at every sound. As soon as the sun came up, we ran to find Abby. When we told her what happened, she looked pale. "You're not the only ones," she said. "A kid from another cabin saw someone trying to break in last night, too." She took us to Greg and the other counselors, who listened carefully as we recounted everything. When the kid from the other cabin described the man he saw, dirty clothes, a scruffy beard, I felt my stomach drop. It was him, the same man from the forest. Greg didn't waste any time. "Everyone, pack your stuff. We're shutting this camp down." We packed up as fast as we could. Everyone was on edge, constantly looking over their shoulders. The counselors tried to act calm, but you could see it in their faces. They were just as freaked out as we were. Before the bus arrived, Jason and I decided to stick together. "One last look," he said, nodding toward the edge of the forest. I didn't want to go, but part of me needed answers. We followed a narrow trail, keeping our footsteps light. About 10 minutes in, we stumbled upon a hidden shack, one we hadn't seen before. It was smaller than the one we'd found earlier, and it looked like someone had just been there. The door was slightly ajar, and Jason pushed it open. Inside, my stomach flipped. There were Polaroid photos scattered everywhere. Pictures of the cabins, the fire pit, the lake, even some of us. Jason picked one up and froze. "Dude, this is from last night." It was a photo of our cabin, taken through the window while we were inside. My face stared back at me from the image, blurry but unmistakable. We heard a rustling sound outside and bolted, leaving everything behind. When we made it back to camp, Greg was waiting for us. "Where were you?" he barked, but then he saw our faces and stopped. "What happened?" We told him about the shack, about the photos. His jaw tightened and he called Abby over. "Keep everyone near the bus, no exceptions." The bus was supposed to arrive at noon, but by 1 p.m. it still wasn't there. The counselors tried to keep everyone calm, but the tension was unbearable. Then we saw him. The man stepped out from the tree line, just standing there like he owned the place. This time he didn't smile. He just stared. "Get inside," Greg shouted, waving everyone into the dining hall. Most of the counselors stayed behind to guard the door, but Jason and I watched from the window. The man started walking toward the cabins, slow and deliberate. Greg called out to him, "Hey, you need to leave." The man didn't respond. Instead, he pulled something out of his pocket, a rusted knife that glinted in the sunlight. Greg didn't wait. He grabbed a baseball bat from the porch and started toward him. The other counselors yelled for him to stop, but Greg wasn't having it. We couldn't see exactly what happened next, but there was shouting, and then the man turned and ran back into the forest. Greg didn't chase him. He came back, his face pale and his hands shaking. "He'll be back," he muttered under his breath. The bus finally arrived a few hours later, and we wasted no time loading up. As we drove away, I couldn't stop looking out the window, half expecting to see the man standing at the edge of the forest watching us leave. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. For weeks, I had nightmares about that man, about the photos, about the way he circled our cabin with the flashlight. A few months ago, curiosity got the better of me, and I started looking into the camp. What I found still gives me chills. After we left, the police searched the area and found the shack we'd discovered. Inside, they found dozens of Polaroids, notebooks filled with disturbing sketches, and a map of the camp with every cabin marked. The worst part? There were more photos, ones taken at night, through the windows, of kids sleeping. The man was never found. I think about that summer all the time. Maybe it was just some hermit who lost his mind out there in the woods. Or maybe it was something worse. Whatever it was, I'll never forget the feeling of his eyes on me, and I hope I never feel it again.